wanted to do something concrete that would spark change and bring attention to the injustices that are happening today.
We Are Proud presents a candid conversation on race relations. Now, your host, Jaron Jordan.
Hey there, friends, and thanks for being with me. I'm Jaron Jordan. What happens to a dream deferred? It's a question Harlem Renaissance writer Langston Hughes poses in his poem Harlem, published in 1951. This year we have been hit by two pandemics, a global health pandemic and a racial pandemic that some have chosen to ignore for far too long. The deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and the countless others whose names often don't make headlines have motivated a new wave to join an old cry for justice.
And we stand in solidarity with all those people, and we just letting y'all know that this shit not finna keep happening.
In the capital city, we've been here before. The death of Alton Sterling in 2016 thrust Baton Rouge into a national spotlight, deepening painful wounds for some and sparking difficult conversations for others about where our community was and where we wanted it to be.
Please, I can't breathe.
Our moral compass has to respond when we see tragedies like that happen, regardless of the color of our skin.
Now, as we find ourselves having similar conversations, what are we learning as to not repeat the past? Are you ready to see the dream of freedom and equality become reality, or does it explode? We are continuing our conversation on race relations in Baton Rouge with a focus on justice and politics. Right now, millions of voters are casting ballots in what many are calling the most consequential election of their lives. Over the next half hour, we'll take a look at race and politics, the legal and political barriers that exist for Black and brown people, and what we can all do right now to ensure our community becomes one of equality and fairness for all. After all, one of the founding ideals of our current legal system proclaims equal justice under law. So we'll start with justice and what that equality means. I recently had the chance to profile the journey of Baton Rouge's own Archie Williams from the capital city to Angola to Hollywood. Here's his story and how he's using that journey to motivate change. Archie Williams captured our hearts with this audition on America's Got Talent.
Don't let the sun go down on me.
Then broke our hearts with this.
I was just incarcerated for 37 years for somebody else's crime.
Ooh.
DNA freed me.
Oh, my God.
The rate and the number of wrongful convictions is reflective of the number of Black men also serving life sentences in Louisiana.
G. Park with the Innocence Project New Orleans says American institutions that are responsible for upholding justice are being overburdened, contributing to mass incarceration across the state.
In the past 19 years, we were found in 2001, we have freed or exonerated 36 individuals who have served collectively more than 873 years in prison. Because the public defender system is so underfunded, and because all of our clients were poor, we see in the transcripts, in the trial files, the lack of resources that was available to the defense counsel to effectively put on a defense.
It's a reality Marshall Thomas sees every day.
It's an intense experience to walk into the jail and talk to, your fellow Black man who is the same age as you, the same skin color as you, and you can really think, there but for the grace of God go I.
As an EBR public defender, Thomas represents clients who typically can't afford their own defense. But like public defenders across the country, Thomas says on top of disparities in Louisiana, his office is often representing a disproportionate number of cases with little to no equal funding. The EBR city parish budget illustrates the disparity when it comes to funding public defense versus criminal prosecution. This year, local government allocated $250,000 to the Public Defender's Office compared to $7 million allocated to the EBR District Attorney's Office.
There is no justice. There is a legal process. But in terms of equitable justice, I haven't seen it played out in mass, especially not in this city.
Ashley White works with the Bail Project, a national organization working to address mass incarceration through the lens of the cash bail system.
You're not able to consult with your attorneys. You're not able to be in your community with people that support you. If you have other mental health or substance abuse issues, you're not receiving treatment. If you have medical conditions, you're not getting adequate medical care. This system needs to be disrupted because it will continue to perpetuate more inequalities if we don't stop it.
Archie has overcome the system that failed him so miserably for so many years. This year, less than 1 year after his release, Archie finished top 10 on this season of America's Got Talent. I talked exclusively with Archie after his season ended about what justice means to him.
It don't work. I don't have nothing to say to evil. Only thing I have to say is to my people, the only way we overcome is unification, because evil is going to be evil. You can protest, you can do what you want, and for 400 years we've been doing the same thing over and over. It don't work.
Now Archie hopes to be a blessing to someone else. He's planting a church in Baton Rouge and working directly with other men who've been wrongfully incarcerated.
If they hold on to faith, they will realize it is a light at the end of every tunnel.
Watching a BR Proud presentation, a candid conversation on race relations.
Joining me now to dissect some of these issues, we have State Representative Ted James, who represents a portion of the Baton Rouge area. We also have the newly appointed Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the East Baton Rouge Parish Public Defender's Office, Ms. Elena Booth. So I really want to start by asking you both, what is justice to you? What does it mean? And do you see it being carried out equally in our community? And Representative James, I'll start with you.
You know, I'll say justice to me is when the laws are applied equally, no matter your zip code, no matter your race, no matter your age, no matter who you love, no matter who you're married to, no matter what mistake you may have been accused of. I think that we would not be having this conversation if justice was evenly applied.
I refuse to call it the criminal justice system because I don't believe there's much justice that exists right now in our system that exists today. But when people come to me through the criminal legal system, some of them are in their lowest points of life. And the question is, how are we addressing that? How are we addressing mental health? How are we addressing drug rehab centers? How are we addressing all of these different issues? I am a lawyer. I am extremely trained in the courtroom. However, I am not trained to be a social worker. And this whole system of defund the police, it's not because we hate the police. I believe great police officers exist. I am not that person that's stating that. But do we need to look at how we're funding the police versus how we're funding mental health? Yes. Do we need to look at how we're funding drug rehab centers? Yes. Do we need to look at how are we funding different resources that the community can use?
I've never seen a more racist document than the one you brought, because we don't feel that way here.
That was Representative Dodie Horton of Houghton saying that language in a piece of legislation recently this year to study police reform in the wake of George Floyd's death was offensive, and that she's, quote, never seen a more racist document than the one that you've brought. And the you that she's referring to is, of course, State Representative Ted James, who's back now with the panelist Elena Booth as well. Representative James, the legislation was passed, but only after some of the terminology was changed to make people a little bit more comfortable with it. You said that you were fine with that because it meant that the legislation was moving forward and the overall goal to study this was still moving forward. I just want you to talk a little bit about that.
Look, you know, I have matured a lot in my legislative career because of how important this issue is. I decided to focus more on the therefore be it resolved as opposed to the whereas. And in the whereas, Republicans didn't want to vote on a piece of legislation that stated that there's an issue in this country with white police officers killing black and brown people.
I don't mean to cut you off, but why do you think that is?
Because again, they don't want to admit that there's an issue, right? And it's not happening in their community. I guarantee you, if black police officers were out there killing white teenagers, we wouldn't be having this discussion because laws would be changed. Well, you know what? We wouldn't have to change laws because prosecutors would prosecute them. They will go to trial, they will get convicted, and they will be jailed.
It just kind of blows my mind about how much protection they have versus what my clients have, right? My clients sit in jail, you know, and you arrest them first, and then you go figure out what happened. That's exactly what happens with my clients. You then investigate, then you run the fingerprints, then you do everything that is necessary, allegedly, to convict them. But with police officers, you give them so much protection where they get to sit at home with their families for a few years before you even bring charges to a grand jury.
I think one of you mentioned it earlier in this conversation. This does not make you anti-police. You're pro-good officers.
Yeah, and the thing is, if people understood how, she talked about this benefit of the doubt. Black folks, we don't get that benefit of the doubt. We give officers the benefit of the doubt. When I spoke about my experience with law enforcement on the House floor and talked about the fact that I was once pepper sprayed, some of my colleagues asked, "Well, what did you do?" You know, and when I talked about the experience at my barbershop, some of them said, did something really not happen? Like the benefit of the doubt that is, we just give it blanket to all police officers, no matter what, no matter the video, no matter the footage, no matter the fact that they have purposefully turned off body camera footage. We still give folks the benefit of the doubt, and it is extremely problematic. But if the general public really could sit in on some of these hearings and listen to how the law not protects, it shields police officers. Under the law and under civil service agreements, a police officer, I can go out there and shoot and kill somebody and tell my chief that I'm not talking to him for 30 days until I go and find a lawyer. There's a lawyer on every corner in Baton Rouge. It don't take you 30 days to get a lawyer. In addition to the 30 days, I can go in and view my body camera footage, dash cam footage, body camera footage of any other officer that was there before I have to speak to my chief. That is problematic. And if people knew and understood that, they would have issues.
I want to ask you both, how do we address the systemic racism that exists in our institutions in terms of policing?
Number one, we have to admit that we have them, right? We have people that still won't admit that we have a problem with policing. We have a problem with racism in the institution of policing. If we go back to the history of policing, it was founded on racism, right? To not admit that we have issues when Black and brown bodies are falling and officers are moving without consequence is problematic. And you mentioned it perfectly. Even in the House floor this week, anytime we have a discussion about police officers, it's almost like you have to go down there and give a disclaimer. The police are important. Like, I have family members that are police officers. I have fraternity brothers who are police officers, right? You know, when we reformed teachers, nobody thought that it was a referendum against teachers. You know, when we reform other things, it's not a referendum against the institution. However, we have issues regarding policing. And I'll tell you, the only way that we can really address it is by first admitting that there's an issue. And there's too many people in our community. There are too many people that are elected that won't admit that it is a problem. We spent almost 2 hours debating a bill that will penalize police, jurisdictions for defunding police departments when not a single person has moved to defund the police department in the Louisiana, in the whole state of Louisiana.
Elena, I know that the NAACP is also involved in a case recently with a Baton Rouge police sergeant. He is now on administrative leave for making racist and sexist comments to an online forum. We've heard a number of mayoral candidates say that we need to increase police pay, say that training is the solution to eliminating some of these issues. How do you train someone to not go online and spew their racist views under a different pseudonym?
Those officers are a public safety issue for the Black and brown community. You know, George Floyd, that police officer, you know, kneeling on his neck and killing that man did not start with the action. It started with a way of thinking. The same way of thinking for Officer Kuhn, the same way of thinking for Officer McKay, you know, and it's countless others. But you all tell me that, oh, well, you know, the Bill of Rights, we can't go back and do anything because it's too late, even when it's proven that it's been a cover up ever since. If you don't think that the way of thinking affects who a police officer pulls over, who they put in handcuffs, who they don't give the benefit of the doubt to, it affects all of that. And officers are given so much discretion. We trust them to know, you know, hey, who to pull over, how to pull them over, how to de-escalate a situation. So if that way of thinking is that the Black and brown community is beneath you in any type of way, you should not be policing the community. You should not be on the police force. You lost your right to be able to wear this badge. 100%, completely, no questions asked.
You're watching a BR Proud presentation, a candid conversation on race relations.
We're back now with the story of Fair Wayne Bryan. He is a Louisiana man with a unique perspective on what justice is and what it means. Bryan was sentenced to life at Angola for a 1997 conviction after a failed attempt to steal a set of hedge clippers. The crime wouldn't normally carry a life sentence, but Bryant was convicted under Louisiana's habitual offender law. It's a law that Louisiana Supreme Court Chief Justice Bernette Johnson has called a, quote, modern manifestation of black codes and pig laws that, after the 13th Amendment, were largely designed to re-enslave African Americans by introducing extreme sentences for petty theft associated with poverty. Bryan served 24 years of that life sentence before being granted to parole less than 2 weeks ago. He joins us now alongside Andrew Hundley of the Louisiana Parole Project, which played a big role in the process. I want to thank you both for being here. What would you say about Louisiana's habitual offender law that sentenced you to life in prison in 1997?
The laws needs to be reconstructed under the habitual offender laws, especially. As Justice Johnson said, they were pig laws, but still they use them on who they want to use them on. The law applies to certain peoples, and certain people it doesn't, and that's harsh. That's really harsh.
And we should note that prior to that 1997 conviction that ultimately handed Fair that life sentence, he did have 4 prior convictions, including attempted armed robbery, attempted forgery, simple burglary, and the illegal possession of stolen things. Andrew, I want to turn to you. This is not about condoning any type of criminal behavior, but what does Fair's case illustrate about Louisiana's habitual offender laws and its impact on black and brown people?
Well, Fair's case is a reminder that extreme sentencing doesn't benefit society. So it's really easy to tell that, there is some sort of systematic racism that exists in our sentencing structure that end up meaning all of these black people are sent to prison and forgotten about.
Obviously, Andrew, you have a pretty unique experience to all of this, having gone through this yourself. I'm interested the process that you went through, as a young white man, and what you see in terms of differences with the black prisoners that you're working to go through the same process that you went through.
Well, definitely, I recognize that I have and had and continue to have a lot of privilege. One, I committed a much more serious crime than Fair and spent less time in prison than he did. When I was released, I had a lot of family support. I had a network in the community that was willing to support me and to make my transition easier. And it's not that I wanted it more than, let's say, Fair Wayne or other people. It's just I had privilege. I had a lot of things going for me. And that's the idea behind Louisiana Parole Project. We want people who have rehabilitated themselves, changed their lives while they're incarcerated, to have the opportunity to be successful when we go home.
Chief Justice Johnson had also said that the 23 years at the time that Bryan served cost Louisiana taxpayers more than $518,000. Equal justice advocates would say that's a lot of money that could go into rehabilitation efforts. Do you agree with the fact that there is a lot of money spent on incarceration rather than rehabilitation? And I want to ask, what role do you think that access to resources for mental health, behavioral health, social services plays in making sure that people with problems that need to be addressed don't actually recidivate?
Well, it would actually be a great help due to the fact that you have evaluation of a person's mental state, their physical state, and you be able to have whole conversations with them to see exactly where they're at in life.
Fair Wayne Bryan, I appreciate you for taking some time to talk with us this afternoon. I want to thank Andrew Hundley with the Louisiana Parole Project as well. That does it for us, friends, but I encourage you to log on to brproud.com right now. The conversation continues with my colleague Dion Guillory.
Color Crossroads, COVID-19 and black businesses. Now, here's your host, Dion Guillory.
Good evening, I'm Dion Guillory. Thank you for continuing this conversation on Black-owned businesses with us. If you missed our recent episode of Candid Conversations, here are just a few of the things that we talked about. So we started the conversation understanding how the focus shifted onto Black businesses. We know from historical context that activists such as Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey encouraged Blacks to shop with their own many years ago. But recently, the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery sparked the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement all over again and encouraged all to shop Black. We also dived into the topic of how the global pandemic impacted some Black businesses, leaving some to close their doors for good, many of which couldn't handle the financial strain placed on their businesses with limited access to funding. We sat down with Chris Tyson with Build Baton Rouge, and he told us about some of the major projects they have going on, and then we ended it with highlighting some local businesses right here in Baton Rouge in case you were just looking for some last-minute Christmas gifts. So you can rewatch the Candid Conversations episode and learn more about the local businesses on our website. Just click around on brproud.com. With the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have been working from home on our own businesses, or we're running our businesses from home, and many have resorted to using social media like never before. So my next two guests have created a business group with more than 20,000 members so far, and that number is increasing, I'm sure, as we speak. Right now, we're going to talk to Honoré Muyaka and Treasure Green with the Black CEO Group. Thank you guys for joining us. And you can see it on their shirts right now. We were just talking about the shirts. First of all, tell us how the group came about and what made you create it.
It was just one random afternoon. It was like a Sunday.
Yes.
And we were sitting and watching TV, and I was scrolling, and then I posed. I'm like, let me take a pose. Like, I want to create a group. And she was like, about what? I said, just something to highlight Black businesses. And the idea was really small because she has clients, I have clients, and we were just thinking what ways we could help our clients that patronize our business, which my business service other businesses who service the community. And so easily like that, by the end of the night, it was 500 members.
Oh, wow.
By the next day, it was like 2,000 members. And by the end of the week, it's like close, knocking on 10,000. And now it's like 20,000 plus.
Right, 20,000 plus, and I'm sure it's going to continue growing. Just complete transparency, which I failed to mention at the top of our interview, I'm wearing a mask because of our social distancing. They are not, because they live together and they're engaged. So that's the reason why they aren't wearing masks. My next question about the page is, you know, there's a big divide when it comes to available resources for Black business owners. What have your experiences been when it comes to trying to search out those resources?
My experience has been that it's pretty hard, especially like when you're looking online to find Black businesses. Pretty much when you type in whatever particular service you're looking for, the first thing that comes up is not a minority-owned business. So it's like we had to create something that's a resource to pretty much offer those services to people that were looking specifically to support Black-owned businesses.
Honoré Muyaka and Treasure Green, thank you guys so much for using your platform in this way, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, before we even leave, I want to take 10 more seconds to highlight. We have a third member that helped us to put this whole thing together. She couldn't make it to this today, so we do want to shout out Kimberly Christoph. She's the other half of the crew. Definitely.
It's adorable.
So, yeah. Kimberly Christoph, shout out to you.
All right.
She worked hard.
Definitely. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And Kimberly. All right. We'll be right back.